Hey guys, tonight we drift into a forgotten corner of Greek mythology, so forgotten, in fact, you might be the only person in 2 millennia to even pretend to care. But that's perfect, because tonight's story isn't meant to stir your soul or change your life. It's meant to gently pluck at your curiosity like a sleepy harp until your brain waves slow, your eyelids droop, and you eventually just give up trying to pay attention. We're talking about a minor god so unimpressive that not even the gossipy muses bothered to immortalize him in song. His name? Linos. And no, not the one who taught Heracles music and got brained for his trouble. This is a different Linos. The duller one. The tree one. The one who, honestly, kind of preferred it that way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is, especially if you're defying logic and tuning in at, like, 11 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a forgotten forest trail, where the earth beneath your feet is more moss than dirt, and the air smells faintly of figs, old parchment, and disinterest. It's quiet. But not the dramatic, cinematic kind of quiet. Just, the kind of quiet that suggests even the birds couldn't be bothered to chirp. Here, you find him. Linos. He's reclining under a stubby olive tree with a sandal in one hand and a fig in the other, looking like he's halfway through both eating and napping. He's not particularly handsome, but he's not handsome either. His skin has a slightly barky texture, and his curls twist like vines around his ears. A nymph once said he had the kind of face that makes you think of soup, warm, simple, not exciting but vaguely comforting. Now, Linos isn't a god anyone prays to. Not for rain, not for war, and definitely not for passion. If anything, he's what you'd get if you merged the energy of a houseplant with the ambitions of a mossy rock. His divine domain? Unclear. Something between quiet growth and mild weather. Scholars argue whether he was born from Gaia, or just happened when a breeze got tired and formed a shape. And yet, somehow, he exists. Just outside the better-lit mythology. A background extra in the great Greek drama who didn't even bother to audition. You watch him pick at a fig with the kind of concentration usually reserved for brain surgery. He pauses occasionally, squinting up at the leaves, as if considering a deeply philosophical question, then gets distracted by a ladybug crawling across his knee. In this early stage, Linos mostly wanders. Not in a tragic, cursed, eternal kind of way. Just, because he doesn't have a job. He moves from grove to grove, trailing a scent of fresh-cut wood and something vaguely nutty, often mistaken for almond butter. Farmers sometimes see him and assume he's some local spirit. They leave offerings, baskets of olives, mostly. Occasionally, an awkwardly carved wooden spoon. There's a fringe theory among modern classicists that Linos was once intended to be a weather god, but his storms kept arriving 3 days late and with inconvenient humidity. Another theory posits that he was a fertility deity, but his blessings only produced zucchini, which was deeply unpopular during the Bronze Age. Still, neither claim is universally accepted. Historians still argue whether he even had a cult following or if people just confused him with decorative furniture. Linos doesn't mind. In fact, he seems to prefer it. At night, he lies in the soft beds of ferns and listens to stories carried on the wind. The breeze, which seems unusually fond of him, rustles through leaves and hums low lullabies. Sometimes, it swirls his curls gently as if tousling them in approval. Other gods crave lightning bolts and epics. Linos finds fulfillment in cloud watching. You sit beside him now. You feel the air slow down. Everything in this space seems to move at half speed, the insects, the light, your own thoughts. You might be thinking, wait, isn't mythology supposed to be dramatic? And you'd be right. But here's the thing, they can't all be about gods seducing swans or turning people into spider creatures. Sometimes, mythology needs a nap. And so, in this warm, breezy lull of a story, you begin to notice how silence becomes its own kind of music. Linus, without lifting his head, hums along to the rustle of olive leaves. His tune has no beginning, no crescendo. Just a loop, like the sound of waves lapping endlessly, or your inner monologue while waiting for pasta water to boil. A tortoise ambles past. Linus waves lazily. He might be friends with the tortoise. Or maybe it's just one of those nodding acquaintanceships common among immortal woodland beings. He has no great trauma. No quest. No looming curse. At most, he has a mildly itchy patch behind his left ear, and he's considering whether it's worth scratching. And yet, in his stillness, you feel something shift in you. Like a sigh escaping from a tightly wound week. Like forgetting a deadline and realizing it didn't matter. Like melting into a beanbag chair shaped like irrelevance. Even his breath seems part of the forest's rhythm, deep, woody, slow. You can't help but match it. Linus, god of nothing urgent, rests his head on a smooth stone. The fig slips from his hand and is carried off by ants. He doesn't notice. Or he does, and he just doesn't care. Either way, you feel your own muscles start to unclench. Welcome to the myth of the god who did not strive. Who did not rage. Who became, eventually, a tree, not out of punishment, but because it sounded like a decent way to spend forever. But that's much later. For now, he's still flesh and mostly bone, still vaguely humanoid, still humming. Still, here. You blink slowly, maybe twice, and when your eyes open again, Linus is still there. Exactly as you left him. One sandal on, one sandal off, a breeze lifting a lazy curl off his forehead. You're not sure how long you've been watching him, but time isn't really a thing here, it's more of a politely optional suggestion. Today, Linus decides to wander again. Not for any grand reason. There's no prophecy to fulfill, no sacred object to retrieve. He just wants to see if the grove 3 hills over has better figs. That's about the extent of his weekly goals. As you follow him, the scenery shifts in the gentlest way possible. The trees don't rush past, they meander. The dirt path widens like it was asked nicely. You step over sleepy roots and past moss-covered rocks that look suspiciously like they might snore. This is a part of Greece that doesn't show up on most maps. Somewhere between Thessaly and who cares here. A pocket of land where the myths forgot to shout. Here, even the cicadas seem to hum in lowercase. Every plant, every stone, every barely bothered bee gives the impression of having once dreamed of being significant and then decided against it. Linus pauses at an olive tree. Not because it's special, though, if you look closely, there's a face in the bark that's either a nymph or someone's bored uncle. He touches the trunk gently, almost reverently. It's a simple act, but in the world of myth, small gestures often echo louder than thunder. Or at least, they would, if anyone were listening. You wouldn't guess it from his sleepy demeanor, but Linus notices things. Subtle things. Like the way certain trees hum when they're lonely. Or how some rocks remember footsteps for 100 years. He doesn't share these observations. Who would he tell? But still, he notices. As he moves deeper into the grove, you begin to hear it, the gossip. Not the mortal kind, juicy, petty, and exhausting. This is leaf gossip. The chatter of plants, passed from root to root, leaf to leaf, seed to worm to breeze. You lean in, and if you listen with that quiet part of your brain, the one you use to remember old lullabies or where you left your favorite mug, you catch snippets. Did you hear? Hermes lost his sandals again. Another mortal turned into a cow. Why do they always choose cows? Apollo's pouting. Something about a poetry contest. Linus walked by here last week. Still no ambition. Good for him. It's comforting, in a strange way, to know the natural world is just as nosy as your aunt at family gatherings. Linus, of course, says nothing. He just walks. But every so often, he tilts his head like he's chuckling internally at a particularly dry bit of moss humor. Here's a bit of mainstream mythological history for you. The Greeks didn't just revere the big Olympians. They had entire cults dedicated to river gods, rock spirits, and even abstract concepts like opportunity and modesty. So it's entirely plausible that someone, somewhere, lit a candle to Linus once. Maybe they wanted their tomato crop to come in slightly above average. Maybe they wanted a quiet day. Maybe they liked trees. One of the more obscure texts, written on what was likely a clay tablet shaped like a donkey, mentions a Linos Thesios, which scholars translate either as the lazy vine or Linus who watches the sun and doesn't do much about it. Historians still argue whether this was a joke, a real title, or just someone's attempt to write poetry during a mild heatstroke. Eventually, Linus reaches a clearing filled with half-wild olive trees and a soft, sun-dappled breeze. Here, the mythic energy is just barely detectable, like when your phone clings to that last bar of signal in the countryside. He sits. You sit. A beetle the size of your thumb tries to climb your shoe but gives up halfway and takes a nap. Mood. It's in this quiet clearing that you begin to understand something strange. Not strange in the, this tree just talked to me, way. But strange in the, why am I suddenly okay with nothing happening, way. It sneaks up on you. Like sleep. Or forgiveness. Or realizing you never needed to be the main character all the time. Linus lies back on the ground and closes his eyes. The sunlight shifts through the leaves and dapples his skin like lazy paint strokes. You think of words like drowsy, tepid, fine. And somehow, all of them feel divine. A rabbit hops past. It pauses. Looks at Linus. Then nods as if to say, yeah, this guy gets it. You wonder if this is why people used to tell stories like this, to feel okay about slowing down. To invent someone whose divine gift was not doing much of anything and being really good at it. And maybe you envy him, just a little. Not because he's a god. But because he has no meetings. No inbox. No ambition gnawing at the edge of his soul like a raccoon in a pantry. Just figs. Breeze. And the occasional leaf that lands on his chest like a sleepy medal of honor. And so you sit with him. You breathe. The day lazily tilts toward evening, but nobody rushes. There will be time for things later. You wake, if you ever truly fell asleep, still in the grove, with Linus beside you, stretching one leg as though he's trying to remember what legs are for. A leaf sticks to his cheek. He does nothing about it. Nature will sort it out eventually. There's a sound, a voice, if you could call it that. Soft and lilting, like a stream trying its best to form sentences. It belongs to a nymph. Not a famous one, not Echo or Daphne or Eurydice. Just a local nymph with a braid full of twigs and the mild sarcasm of someone who's been part of the landscape for too long. She looks at Linus, blinks once, and says, "You'll be a tree someday, you know." Linus, true to form, doesn't seem bothered. He shrugs, brushes a bit of moss off his elbow, and replies with something between a grunt and a thoughtful hum. It's the mythological version of, okay, cool. The nymph laughs, not loudly, but enough to rustle a few branches overhead. "It won't be a punishment," she says. "You'll just, let it happen." You consider interjecting. You want to ask questions. Why a tree? Why him? But no one invites you to speak, and honestly, the moment feels like it would politely ignore you anyway. The nymph circles Linus once, her bare feet brushing the ground without bending a single blade of grass. Most gods would be outraged, she continues. Turned into a tree. They'd burn down the forest. Scream at the fates. Demand a rewrite. Linus nods slowly, like a tree already trying on the idea of itself. Now, here's a solid mythological fact. transformation into trees isn't all that rare in Greek mythology. Daphne famously became a laurel to escape Apollo's pursuit, and Philemon and Baucis were turned into entwined oaks as a divine reward. But these transformations are usually tied to drama, passion, tragedy, capital S stories. They happen because something extreme forces them to. But Linos? He's just been offered treedom like a cup of lukewarm herbal tea, and he's considering it with the same enthusiasm he'd show for a new brand of sandals. There's a fringe tale recorded by an obscure Roman scribe who clearly didn't pass Latin class with honors. In it, Linos is said to have once attempted to summon a thundercloud and accidentally created a damp fog that hovered over his favorite napping rock for 3 days. The same text quotes an unnamed oracle who predicted, quite vaguely, he shall root where he rests. Historians still argue whether this referred to Linos or just poorly made stools in the oracle's chamber. Back in the grove, the nymph has now found a comfortable spot nearby and begun braiding her hair with fallen petals. She hums an old tune, maybe one that predates the Olympians, and Linos hums along. Off-key. Slowly. You start to notice something different. The way the wind moves around him. How small twigs seem to bend ever so slightly in his direction. There's a quiet gravity to Linos now, like the forest itself is casually electing him for something he didn't campaign for. But none of this is urgent. This is not the climax of the story. It's just a point on the meandering line of his existence. And then, without drama or fanfare, Linos stands up. He dusts his tunic. Not because it's dirty, but because the act of dusting helps him feel like something happened. He gestures vaguely northeast and starts walking, as if the movement will eventually decide where he's going. The nymph calls after him, "You'll know the place when you find it." He waves a hand in acknowledgement, though whether it's a thank you or a "please stop talking" is unclear. As you follow him again, the grove behind you sighs. That's the only word for it. Not mournfully. Just the sound of a place returning to its usual rhythm after a brief, minor disturbance. As Linos walks, you can tell he's thinking. Not deeply. Linos's thoughts aren't like philosophical labyrinths, they're more like footpaths through clover fields. But today, one thought sticks with him, becoming a tree. He imagines it in the same way you might daydream about being a cozy armchair in a lakeside cabin. Not as an escape, not even as a metaphor. Just, as a thing that might be nice. The ground begins to slope downward, and the air smells of sun-warmed bark and something a little citrusy. A bee buzzes near Linos's head and, after a brief evaluation, decides he is not pollen-worthy and moves along. You might be wondering how a god, minor or otherwise, could be so indifferent to his fate. The truth is, not all divine beings were built from thunder and ambition. Some, like Linos, may have been created as a cosmic afterthought. Or maybe the universe just needed a nap and accidentally gave it form. He walks until sunset, and when the light begins to turn syrupy gold, he stops beside a squat, broad-limbed tree. It looks like it's been waiting for him. Linos doesn't speak to it. That's not his style. He just sits beneath it, resting his back against its trunk. For the first time, he closes his eyes not out of tiredness, but out of curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, the tree hums back. You sit with your back against the same tree, next to Linos, watching the last slivers of sunlight filter through the branches. They stretch across the ground like lazy golden fingers, too sleepy to grip anything. Linos hasn't said a word in an hour, and neither have you. That's not awkward here. That's just standard. Eventually, he shifts slightly. Not because he's uncomfortable, he's too divine for backaches, but more like a vine lazily adjusting itself toward the sun. He lifts his head and looks up into the branches. You follow his gaze, expecting something profound. Maybe a celestial omen. Maybe a glowing owl with tiny spectacles. But no, it's just a bird. A chubby, unimpressed thrush, pecking absently at a figure. Linos watches the bird with something resembling admiration. Nice life, he mutters. You nod, as if either of you had the right to judge bird life. Still, the idea seems to stick. Nice life becomes the baseline. A goal, if you can call it that. Not immortality. Not conquest. Just, be like the thrush. Eat the figure. Don't overthink the branch. In Greek mythology, most gods have portfolios. Domains. Agendas. Apollo is out here with his sun chariot and plague arrows. Athena's giving TED talks on warfare and weaving. But Linus? He's the suggestion that maybe, just maybe, your life doesn't have to be a dramatic arc with a 3-act structure. A breeze picks up. The tree seems to lean in slightly, like it's listening to Linus breathe. There's something building here, but again, not in a plot twist kind of way. More in the way dough rises when you're not looking. Quiet magic. The kind you only notice when you remember to slow down. You glance at the bark behind Linus and swear you see something. Not a face, this time. Not a whole one, anyway. More like the vague imprint of someone leaning into the wood. Like memory is testing out a home. And then, because the universe apparently wants to give this moment a little flair, an old satyr stumbles into the clearing. He's got the air of someone who meant to go to a party but took a nap under a bush for 3 years instead. Twigs in his hair. A wine skin that smells mostly like regret. He stops, stares at Linus, and squints. You're that god who doesn't do anything, right? Linus offers a slow nod. The satyr snorts. You're still around. Linus shrugs. Trees don't walk away. The satyr thinks this is the funniest thing he's ever heard. He laughs until he coughs, then sits down heavily on a stump that might once have been a minor river deity. They sit together in silence for a bit, and then the satyr says, you know, the other gods don't talk about you much. Linus scratches a lazy itch on his neck. That's fine. Doesn't it bother you? Being forgotten. You expect Linus to pause. To reflect. Maybe even to sigh. But instead, he replies, some stories are better whispered. And that, strangely, seems to shut the satyr up. Now, a bit of historical texture here. Minor gods and spirits were once revered in household shrines across ancient Greece. Hestia got her hearth, sure, but even gods of crossroads, kitchen smoke, and mildly helpful breezes had their moment in the spotlight. There's fringe evidence, carved into the side of a very confused donkey bone, that farmers in certain regions once invoked linodaphos to ensure their fig trees napped appropriately. Historians still argue whether this was a real cult or just a very sleepy prank. The satyr eventually stands up, stretches, and says, you'd make a good tree. Not too useful. Not too decorative. Just, solid. Linus actually smiles. It's subtle, but it happens. The satyr stumbles off into the darkening woods, probably to forget this conversation in favor of wrestling moss or losing to a pinecone in dice. And the night settles in. Crickets begin their nightly orchestra, perfectly out of sync. The stars stretch overhead like lazy freckles. Linus doesn't move. You realize he hasn't blinked in a while. You also realize the birds are now roosting on him. One per shoulder. One on the crown of his head. And he lets them. He is, for all intents and purposes, already halfway tree. You watch his vines subtly curl around his ankle. Not in a threatening way. More like an invitation. A soft whisper, if you want to stop here, we can make that happen. You try to imagine this moment in the stories of the other gods. Zeus would have turned this into a declaration. Hera would have made it into a punishment. Poseidon might have caused an earthquake just to distract from the quiet. But here, Linus's transformation, if that's what this is, feels like choosing a comfortable silence over forced conversation. You lie back again, letting the grass cradle your shoulders. Above you, the stars blur slightly with your tired gaze, and you realize you don't need to understand everything right now. Linos breathes in. Holds it. Then lets it go, like a leaf detaching gently from a branch that no longer needs it. Morning arrives with all the urgency of a cat stretching in a sunbeam. The grove doesn't burst into song. There are no trumpeting roosters or gods hurling light across the sky. Just a slow, buttery brightness that seeps in from the edges of everything, warming bark and stone, coaxing dew into steam. Linos hasn't moved. Not much, anyway. One of the birds left a tiny feather tangled in his hair. A small vine has made a modest attempt to loop around his forearm. He regards it the same way you might regard a cardigan someone draped over your shoulders on a breezy evening, not necessary, but not unwelcome. You, meanwhile, stretch and yawn like you've been sleeping at the edge of myth, which, let's be honest, you have. Your legs are a bit stiff. Your thoughts even stiffer. But there's no pressure to shake it off. No narrator pushing you toward the next action beat. This is Linos's world, after all. And in Linos's world, next, is a flexible suggestion. A squirrel stops by. Looks at Linos. Taps one claw against the ground, as if to say, really? Still here? Then shrugs, in squirrel terms, and leaves you both to it. That's when something odd happens, a girl appears. She's young, maybe 12, maybe 14, but she has that ancient youngness the gods sometimes favor. Bare feet, tangled hair, a tunic that looks like it's been hand-sewn by moonlight. She doesn't speak. Just walks right up to Linos and pokes his arm. You're the one, aren't you? Linos opens one eye. Slowly. I might be. The girl squints at him, then turns to you. He doesn't look like much. You raise an eyebrow, but Linos merely shrugs again. It's a powerful shrug. A shrug that says, I contain multitudes, but mostly naps. She takes a seat across from him, cross-legged, and begins to unpack a small cloth pouch filled with oddly shaped stones. She arranges them in a circle, then hums softly, a tune that ripples through the grass like a barely remembered lullaby. It's not magic in the flashy, Zeus-hurling lightning sense. But it's magic in the way old soup recipes are, quiet, effective, slightly mysterious. You're supposed to become a tree, she says, as though stating the weather. That's why I'm here. Linos scratches his chin. Okay. She blinks. That's it. He looks at her, then at you, then back at the grove. What else is there? She seems genuinely baffled. Most gods would demand a prophecy. Or a monument. Or at least some laurel leaves. Linos gently pats the ground beside him. This is enough. Now, let's pause for a historical sidebar, softly, like unrolling a scroll made of sighs. In some rural regions of Arcadia, shepherds and woodcutters would leave tiny offerings, honey, olives, even whispered songs, to the waiting god, a figure with no temples or statues, but whose name appeared scratched into tree bark or painted in faded ochre inside goat sheds. Scholars debate whether this was Linos under a different name or a fusion of minor rustic deities, but the traits align: restful presence, passive blessings, and a rumored fondness for figs. Historians still argue whether this deity was once part of an older pantheon or simply a myth born from too many lazy summer afternoons. Back in the grove, the girl is stacking her stones now, trying to form a miniature tower that keeps listing to the left. I was told to witness the moment, she says without looking up. When you turn. Linos watches her fumble the last stone. It falls with a soft plop into the grass. Why? She shrugs. So someone remembers. The words sit heavy in the clearing, like fog that doesn't plan to leave. You feel something stir in your chest. Not sorrow exactly. Something quieter. A kind of sweet ache that comes when you remember a dream long after it's faded. Linos leans back against the tree. One of his feet starts to merge with the soil. Not dramatically. No golden glow or cracking bark. Just, a quiet thickening. A stillness deepening. The girl finally looks up, eyes wide. Is it starting? Linas considers. Maybe. She opens her pouch again and pulls out what looks like a piece of ancient bread. Breaks off a chunk. Offers it to him. He takes it. Do trees eat? She asks, clearly not expecting a real answer. Maybe just the warm parts, Linas replies. You can't help but smile. This isn't a story about transformation in the way myths usually frame it. There's no desperation here. No violence. No cosmic lesson. It's just a gentle agreement between one being and the world around him. The girl stands. Her stones left as a loose pattern in the dirt. I'll tell them, she says. Linas nods. Or don't. That's fine too. She grins, then dashes off into the trees, feet barely touching the ground. You're left with the quiet again. But it's a fuller quiet. Like the kind that follows the last notes of a song. Or the final sip of tea. It doesn't need a follow-up. You look at Linas. He's halfway sunk into the earth now. Vines are exploring his arms like curious pets. A single blossom has sprouted near his collarbone. He glances at you. You should stretch. This moss will ruin your posture. You chuckle softly, and somewhere nearby, a tree seems to laugh with you. By now, Linas's calves are buried in the forest floor. Not trapped, just welcomed. The earth has extended an invitation, and he's RSVP'd with a slow nod and a mild yawn. You sit beside him, legs still intact, though the moss under you is definitely trying to start something. The morning mist lingers a little longer today. Not lazy, exactly. More like reluctant to let go. You don't blame it. Something about this moment makes everything want to stick around. A breeze drifts through the clearing, and the leaves rustle in that gossiping way trees have when they know something important is happening but won't say what. Linas tilts his head slightly, listening. Not to decipher any message, just to enjoy the sound. That's his secret, really. He doesn't demand answers. He lets things be what they are. You consider trying that. The thought alone makes your muscles unclench a little. Then, from deeper in the woods, comes the creak of wooden wheels. You tense. Linas doesn't. Of course not. A cart emerges, pulled by a shaggy donkey that looks like it's been around since the Titanomachy. Perched on the cart is a man who might be a philosopher, or a particularly dusty potter. His robe is stained with ochre and wisdom, and his hair is a gray cloud tied with twine. He stops the cart just shy of the grove's edge and peers at Linas through thick lenses that double as magnifying glasses and bug catchers. Ah, the man says, you're still mostly man-shaped. Linas offers a vague wave. For now. The man squints, then pulls a scroll from under his seat. It unrolls halfway to the ground, covered in diagrams that mostly resemble trees with labels like Phase 3, Barclay Awareness, and Emotional Photosynthesis. He looks at you. Are you the witness? You shrug. I guess. He nods solemnly, as if this is the most reasonable answer in the world. Good, he says, hopping down from the cart with a grunt. Transformation into arboreal divinity is rare but not unheard of. I've documented 3 such cases. 4, if you count the Laurel incident, though that was more of a poetic sidestep. He kneels beside Linas and pokes the emerging root ankles with a twig. Good root structure. Passive but firm. You've done this before. Linas just raises an eyebrow. Now, if we're being academically thorough, don't worry, we'll do it gently. There were occasional mentions in late Hellenistic texts of dryadic adoption, a term used to describe the process by which non-tree entities became permanent members of a forest's consciousness. Scholars still argue whether this referred to humans, gods, or just particularly slow-moving tortoises mistaken for deities. The man, whose name he eventually reveals as Theophanes, though you get the sense even he forgets that sometimes, begins sketching Linos into the margins of his scroll. What prompted this, exactly, he asks. Linos glances at the sky. Seemed nice. Theophanes blinks twice. You realize most gods transform due to necessity. Escape. Punishment. Grief. Linos shrugs again. The shrug is gaining spiritual weight now. Like a monk's mantra. You get the sense Theophanes wants to argue, but then his donkey sneezes in a way that sounds vaguely like agreement, and he lets it go. Instead, he walks a slow circle around Linos, mumbling things like natural symmetry, sap readiness, and aura of semi-deliberate dormancy. You do your best not to laugh. It would break the spell. Or maybe it wouldn't. Maybe that's the point, this spell is unbreakable because it was never really cast. It's just a choice that keeps happening, one moment at a time. Theophanes stops in front of you now, eyes twinkling behind smudged lenses. Do you know why this matters? You shake your head. Because it's not dramatic. That's why. Because he wasn't forced. He chose this. Gods don't choose stillness. They command storms and shape mountains. They roar. He glances back at Linos. But this one? He whispers. The donkey brays like a punctuation mark. Theophanes nods to himself, rolls up his scroll, and climbs back onto his cart. It'll be years before he's fully tree, he says. Maybe decades. Depends on the soil, the starlight, and whether the birds keep nesting in his beard. He flicks the reins. The cart begins to creak away. Before he vanishes into the trees, he calls back, tell people, or don't. Some stories grow better in silence. Linos waves a hand vaguely in the cart's direction. Maybe it's a goodbye. Maybe he's swatting at a bee. With him, it's often both. The grove is quiet again, though it never really got loud. You sit in the stillness, trying to figure out why this all feels so important. And then you realize, it's because Linos is the god of enough. Not ambition. Not glory. Just enough. Enough sunlight. Enough breeze. Enough being. And in a world full of thunderbolts and betrayal and battles over who gets to name the next constellation, maybe that's what we've always needed. A reminder that stopping isn't failing. That roots are a kind of reaching too. A leaf lands in Linos's lap. He picks it up. Studies it. Then lets it fall again. You don't ask him what it means. You already know. The days fold into one another with the gentle consistency of a slow-burning candle. You find yourself waking beneath the canopy of this quiet grove, where the air smells faintly of fig leaves and distant rain, even when the sky is stubbornly clear. Linos remains rooted where you left him, half god, half tree, and entirely patient. The moss beneath you has thickened, like a plush carpet laid down by woodland custodians with impeccable taste. Each morning, you notice new shoots and blossoms near Linos's branches. Small white flowers, delicate as whispered secrets, bloom and fade without fuss. The grove itself seems to breathe along with him, in that slow, dignified way trees do, time stretching thin, like honey dripped over centuries. Sometimes you swear you hear a soft voice carried on the wind, just a murmur, like the start of a lullaby that fades before it's fully sung. You lean in, but it's gone, just the rustle of leaves, the occasional flutter of wings, and the persistent hum of the world turning, indifferent yet kind. It's easy to forget you're watching a god at all. Most gods make a spectacle of their presence, shaking mountains, summoning storms, or dazzling crowds with blazing chariots. But Linos? He's a whisper, a still moment in the vast chaos. He embodies quiet transformation, the kind you only notice when you stop rushing past. Historians still argue whether minor gods like Linos were originally meant to be more powerful or if their subtlety was intentional, a divine nod to the beauty of patience and simplicity. There are ancient fragments hinting at minor deities who ruled over everyday smallness: the first sip of morning wine, the warmth of a freshly lit fire, the perfect nap on a sunlit afternoon. Linos fits right in. One afternoon, a breeze shifts the grove's mood, carrying with it a faint scent of honey and something you can't quite place: old parchment, maybe, or a half-forgotten poem. A small group of villagers from a nearby hamlet arrives quietly, almost hesitantly. They don't speak at first, but their eyes drift toward Linos with a kind of reverent recognition. They leave tiny offerings at the base of his trunk: wildflowers, a few figs, and a handful of honeycombs. It's a modest ritual, not grandiose but sincere. You watch one elderly woman press her palm gently against the bark, closing her eyes as if she's greeting an old friend rather than a half-tree god. The moment feels sacred, and you realize that despite his quietness, Linos holds a different kind of power, one that asks nothing and gives plenty. As the villagers leave, you notice a small carved wooden token left in the dirt, an acorn with delicate leaves curling around it. It's an old symbol, one that historically represented potential, patience, and growth. Minor gods like Linos didn't command armies, they nurtured moments like these. You glance back at Linos, whose form has changed subtly. His hair blends seamlessly with the new leaves sprouting from his shoulders. His eyes, still bright, seem to hold the wisdom of roots that run deep beneath the earth. He looks at you and offers a smile that doesn't demand anything but acceptance. And somehow, that's enough. You settle into a rhythm, watching the slow dance of seasons as they stretch across the grove. Leaves bud and unfurl, then shift color with the faintest sigh of autumn. Linos changes with them, less human, more sylvan, yet he remains content, an enigma wrapped in bark and calm. A particularly curious thing happens one crisp morning. A group of schoolchildren from the nearby village arrives, led by a teacher with an enthusiasm that could probably power a small city. The kids chatter excitedly, but when they see Linos, the noise dips to whispers. He's not the thunderous, flashy deity of textbooks, but something softer, something quietly compelling. The teacher explains to the children that Linos is a minor god, one who once was fully human and now slowly becoming part of the forest itself. She tells them how he chose this fate, not out of punishment or heroics, but because he simply wanted peace. The kids exchange wide-eyed glances, some skeptical, some captivated. You watch as a small boy tentatively reaches out to touch Linos's arm, now thick with bark and twining vines. The boy's fingers brush the surface, and a smile spreads across his face, like he's just found a secret treasure. This moment, simple and unpretentious, feels more powerful than any lightning bolt hurled by Zeus. It's a reminder that gods don't always need to roar, sometimes, they just need to be present. Historically, ancient Greeks did revere minor gods tied to nature and quiet life, nymphs of streams, spirits of trees, and lesser deities like Linos who symbolized growth and learning. Yet, their stories often get overshadowed by grand myths of battles and tragedies. Scholars still debate how much these minor figures influence daily life and culture, given their subtle presence. As the sun dips lower, the teacher leads the children in a song, a gentle melody praising the earth and the trees. The notes drift through the grove like a warm blanket, wrapping around you, Linos, and the ancient roots below. Linos smiles softly. "They understand," he says. You nod, feeling the truth of it settle in your chest. And somewhere, deep in the grove, a single leaf flutters down, landing lightly in your lap. The grove's quiet hum becomes a steady companion as the days fold into each other. You notice how the light changes, softer in the morning, longer shadows stretching by late afternoon, and how even the breeze seems to carry different stories depending on the hour. Linos remains rooted, not out of entrapment, but choice, and you can feel the steady pulse of that decision in the very air. One afternoon, while you sit leaning against a thick oak nearby, a peculiar visitor arrives, a small, scruffy dog with a crooked tail and eyes full of curiosity. He pads through the grass, sniffing at the moss, the bark, and finally at Linos's half-transformed form. The dog doesn't bark or growl, just sits down beside him, as if accepting Linas as part of the forest pack. You chuckle softly. It's an odd scene, this minor god becoming tree and a scrappy dog acting as guardian or maybe just a friend. You recall that in ancient Greece, dogs often symbolized loyalty and protection but were also associated with various minor deities and spirits. There's a fascinating fringe theory. Some scholars propose that certain minor gods may have had canine companions who served as intermediaries between mortals and the divine. Historians still argue whether these dogs were actual ritual participants or simply beloved animals woven into stories over time. The dog, now dubbed Root by you, because why not, starts following you around, trotting ahead with an enthusiasm that's contagious. Root's presence brings a new dynamic to the grove, more movement, more life, more companionship in the stillness. That evening, as twilight spreads its violet-blue veil, the stars begin to wink awake, and Linus's leaves catch the soft moonlight like shards of silver. You wonder quietly how long it takes for a god to become a full tree. Years? Decades? Centuries? Theophanes, the roving scholar you met earlier, once mentioned it might depend on soil, starlight, and, somewhat surprisingly, the nesting habits of local birds. A bizarre combination, but in mythology, who are we to judge? Linus hums a tune you didn't know he knew, something wistful, almost like a lullaby for those who choose quiet over clamor. You lean back, Root curling up at your feet, and feel the slow, comforting rhythm of patience. It occurs to you that maybe becoming a tree is less about losing oneself and more about finding a different kind of presence, a steady, unassuming witness to time's endless flow. You look over at Linus, whose eyes, though deeper and darker, still carry that spark of life. The breeze picks up gently, rustling the leaves around him, as if the grove itself is breathing a quiet sigh. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the soft sounds and gentle shadows pull you closer to sleep. The nights in the grove become a tapestry of soft sounds and muted lights. Fireflies flicker like tiny stars caught between branches, and the cool air carries the scent of damp earth mixed with the faintest hint of jasmine. You find yourself lingering longer under the canopy, letting the quiet wash over you like a gentle wave. One evening, as the moon rides high and the world slips deeper into dream, a new sound threads through the stillness, a delicate flute melody, light and airy, drifting on the breeze. You sit up, alert but not startled, following the music like it's a breadcrumb trail through the woods. Emerging from behind a curtain of ivy is a figure, a young woman clothed in robes woven from petals and leaves, her hair cascading like a river of autumn gold. She smiles gently at you and then at Linus, who responds with a serene nod. This is Milena, the nymph of twilight and dusk, a minor deity who dances on the edges of day and night. She visits the grove regularly, drawn by the slow transformation and the peaceful energy it exudes. You watch as Milena moves gracefully, her fingers weaving through the air, coaxing the leaves to shimmer with a faint silver glow. Her music seems to stitch the fabric of the evening together, turning shadows into soft blankets of calm. Historians still argue whether such nymphs were originally seen as independent spirits or merely poetic personifications of natural phenomena. Some fringe scholars suggest that nymphs like Milena were early prototypes for more prominent goddesses, representing the subtle, often overlooked transitions in the world. Milena sits beside you and begins to tell stories, whispers of ancient forests, of forgotten groves, and of minor gods who chose quietude over conflict. Her voice is soothing, weaving images of slow growth and gentle change that seem to echo the very essence of Linus's existence. You see, she says, not all power demands thunder. Some power lies in patience, in stillness, in becoming part of the world instead of shaping it. Her flute sings again, and you feel your eyelids grow heavier. The grove around you hums in harmony, a lullaby crafted by leaves, roots, and whispered stories. You realize then that the transformation isn't just Linus's journey, it's yours too. To slow down, to listen, to be present. To find peace not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments that slip through the cracks of everyday life. The night deepens, and you let yourself drift, carried gently on Milena's melody and the rustling breath of the trees. The days blend together in a soft, rolling rhythm. You start to notice details you might have missed before, the way morning light filters through the leaves, painting dappled gold onto the forest floor, the subtle changes in the scent of the air as the seasons shift, the gentle creaking of branches as they sway with the wind. All of it feels alive in a way that's different from the rush of human life, slower, deeper, patient. Linus remains rooted where he chose, his form continuing to shift with time. His hands, once supple and human, now bear the texture of rough bark. His hair flows into leafy tendrils that flutter in the breeze, but his eyes remain bright, the windows to a mind still very much present. You think about transformation, and the many ways it can happen. Not the dramatic kind that myths usually tell, the sudden curses, the frantic escapes, but the slow, unhurried changes that happen when you stop fighting and start listening. This is Linus's story, and maybe, in some quiet way, it's yours too. Theophanes' scrolls come to mind again. That odd mixture of science and myth he's been trying to document, things like arboreal integration and sap consciousness. Historians still debate how much truth lies behind these terms, and whether the ancients even believed in the literal transformation of gods into trees, or if it was more metaphorical, a way to talk about growth and endurance. You reach out and touch one of Linus's new leaves, feeling the delicate veins beneath your fingertips. It's warm, almost like skin, pulsing with a quiet life. You wonder how long it will take before he's fully part of the forest, indistinguishable from the ancient trees around him. Root, the scruffy dog, curls at your feet, his breathing slow and steady. He lifts his head and gives a soft bark, as if reminding you that even in stillness, life moves forward. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe in the scent of earth and leaves in quiet. You realize that maybe the greatest story here isn't about gods or magic, but about the simple act of being, of belonging to a place and time, and letting yourself change with it. The grove holds its breath with you, a silent witness to this slow, gentle transformation. A subtle change takes hold in the grove as spring deepens its grip. The air becomes heavier with the scent of blooming flowers, honeysuckle, wild thyme, and something elusive, maybe the ghost of a forgotten jasmine variety. You breathe it in deeply, feeling a small, unexpected warmth spreading through your chest. Linus, now more tree than man, seems to resonate with the season's renewal. His limbs, thickened, roughened, stretch upward, leaves unfurling in gentle spirals. His bark, once smooth and youthful, gains the texture of age and wisdom, flecked with moss and tiny, shy mushrooms that pop up overnight. You notice the tiny lifeforms thriving on and around him, ants marching in disciplined columns, beetles scurrying beneath his roots, and a robin, bold and curious, that flits onto a low branch and sings a brief, sweet song. You almost expect the forest to whisper back, a dialogue in ancient tongues no one speaks anymore. This communion between Linus and the grove echoes an intriguing historical fact. The ancient Greeks believed that trees were more than just plants, they were living spirits, homes for nymphs, and sometimes even transformed gods. This belief gave rise to sacred groves, places of worship and reverence, often protected by laws and rituals. Yet, historians still debate how widespread and influential these sacred spaces were, compared to the grand temples and urban cults. You find yourself drawn to the idea that transformation is less a loss and more a merging, a becoming part of something larger and more enduring. Linus embodies this fully, his form a testament to change's gentle power. A whisper of wind brings the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate. It's Theophanes again, with his ever-present scroll, now stuffed with new observations and sketches. He approaches respectfully, as if entering a sanctuary. "You're well on your way," he says, eyes twinkling beneath his spectacles. "The sap is rising, and so is your presence." Linus smiles, a deep, rooted grin, and Theophanes carefully sets down a small bundle of herbs, sage, thyme, and bay leaves, at his feet. "Offerings, from those who still honor you," Theophanes explains. "Even the smallest god deserves respect." You watch as Linus inclines his head in silent thanks, the leaves above rustling softly in response. Theophane settles nearby and begins to talk quietly about the interconnectedness of life, the slow dance between human and nature, God and tree. His words float through the air, blending with the scent of herbs and earth. And you realize the grove is more than a place, it's a story, a living history written in bark, leaf, and root. You lean back against a mossy stone, feeling the pulse of the forest beneath you, and for the first time in a long time, you feel completely at peace. The grove's rhythm shifts subtly as summer creeps in, folding warmth into the air like a thick, comforting blanket. You wake to the gentle hum of bees busily moving from flower to flower, their low buzz mixing with the distant chirps of cicadas, the soundtrack of ancient summers. The sunlight slants through the leaves in golden shafts, warming the moss beneath your feet. Linus is changing still, though more slowly now. His bark has deepened to a rich, chestnut brown, and the leaves along his arms flutter with a shimmering green that seems almost too vibrant to be natural. He looks more like a guardian of the forest than a mere god or tree, a quiet sentinel blending seamlessly into the landscape. You notice something odd, a faint glow clings to him at dusk, a soft light that pulses gently like a heartbeat. You wonder if it's your imagination, or perhaps a touch of divine residue. Minor gods often have strange remnants of their power even after transformation. Historians still argue whether this idea of lingering divinity was literal or symbolic, a poetic way to explain nature's mysterious vitality. Fringe myths speak of trees that glow to guide lost travelers or to warn of storms, but it's unclear how much of that is fact or fancy. One afternoon, Root, your loyal scruffy dog, trots ahead and stops beside a patch of wildflowers where a group of villagers has gathered. They're picnicking, their laughter bright and warm like the sun itself. You watch as a child picks a flower and gently places it near Linus's roots, a small act of reverence blending the human world with the sacred grove. The child's gesture sparks something in you, the realization that Linus's story isn't just a myth but a living tradition, quietly surviving in moments like these. Later, as twilight gathers, you and Linus sit side by side, the gentle glow of fireflies flickering around you. The soft rustle of leaves mingles with the faint crackle of a small fire nearby. Linus leans slightly towards you and murmurs, "Transformation isn't about losing yourself, but becoming part of something enduring." You smile, feeling the truth in his words settle deep within you, like roots finding their place in rich soil. The summer night deepens, and you let yourself sink into the calm embrace of the grove, your thoughts slowing with the fading light. The grove settles into the gentle warmth of midsummer. The air hangs thick with the sweet perfume of blooming honeysuckle and ripe figs, mingling with the faint earthiness of moss and bark. Every breath you take feels soaked in the slow magic of growth and transformation. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of buzzing bees and rustling leaves create a lullaby just for you. Linus's form has thickened, his limbs now sturdy branches that sway with a quiet strength. The small white flowers that once blossomed along his shoulders have given way to clusters of soft green leaves, shimmering in the afternoon light. He no longer looks like a god in the human sense, but rather like a timeless sentinel, part of the grove itself. You notice something subtle but profound. When the wind passes through his leaves, the sound resembles a faint, melodic hum, like an ancient tune almost forgotten. It's soothing, like a natural ASMR, easing away the worries that have clung to you throughout the day. Theophanes returns with a new scroll, his face flushed with excitement. He speaks of the ancient practice of dendrolatry, the worship of trees, and how it was more common in rural Greece than temple cults, though less documented. Historians still argue whether dendrolatry influenced the development of major Greek religious traditions or remained a quiet, local custom. He also shares a quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that certain trees were thought to embody not just gods but entire stories, living libraries that held the collective memory of communities. This fits perfectly with Linus's gradual transformation, as if he's becoming a living archive of time and tales. As the sun dips lower, the villagers arrive again, bringing offerings of honey, nuts, and fresh water. You watch as they bow respectfully to Linus, who responds with a gentle rustling of leaves. The exchange feels tender, almost like a conversation without words. You realize that the grove is a meeting place, not just for gods and mortals, but for stories, memories, and the quiet pulse of life itself. The minor god-turned-tree holds it all within his branches. The day closes softly, and you find yourself wrapped in the calm embrace of the grove, ready to drift deeper into the slow dance of night. The early evening settles over the grove like a soft, woven blanket, cool and comforting. You watch the shadows stretch longer, the way the sun filters through leaves, casting delicate patterns that seem to pulse gently with the fading light. Root curls at your feet, his scruffy fur blending into the mossy ground as he lets out a contented sigh. Linus's transformation continues, subtle but relentless. His arms, now thickened with bark, seem almost immovable, yet when the breeze touches them, tiny leaves shiver like whispered secrets. His face, carved with the lines of ancient trees, holds a serene calm that speaks of deep acceptance. You realize he has become something more enduring than flesh, an eternal part of the forest's quiet soul. You recall a historical fact: sacred groves in ancient Greece were often protected by local laws, known as hierophylakes, guardians who ensured no harm came to these living temples. These groves were centers of community life, places for reflection, healing, and storytelling. Historians still argue whether such groves were primarily religious sanctuaries or early ecological preserves, a debate that blends spirituality and practical conservation. A gentle rustling draws your attention to a small family of deer entering the grove. They move gracefully among the trees, pausing briefly near Linus. The largest stag lowers his head, antlers brushing softly against Linus's bark-covered shoulder, a silent gesture of respect. You smile, thinking how this moment encapsulates the delicate balance of life here, the mingling of human, animal, and divine in quiet harmony. Later, you sit with Theophanes, who excitedly shares a fringe theory. Some believe that minor gods like Linus could communicate with the natural world through their tree forms, acting as conduits for the forest's collective consciousness. While mainstream scholars remain skeptical, it's a charming idea, one that feels just right in this tranquil place. The night deepens, and the grove hums softly with the life of nocturnal creatures awakening. You lean back against a sturdy trunk, feeling the steady heartbeat of the earth beneath you, lulled by the grove's timeless embrace. Your eyelids grow heavy as you listen to the whispering leaves, the faint call of an owl, and the gentle breathing of the minor god who chose to become one with the trees. The dawn slips in quietly, painting the grove with gentle strokes of pink and gold. The air is cool and crisp, filled with the faint scent of dew-drenched leaves and freshly turned earth. You find yourself drawn into this slow awakening, the world softening around you as sunlight filters through the branches like warm, honeyed water. Linus stirs in his own way, a subtle shift of leaves, the creak of bark stretching after a long night. Though rooted firmly in the soil, there is a life in him that pulses beneath the surface, like the slow beat of a hidden heart. You watch as a spider spins its delicate web nearby, weaving threads that glisten in the morning light. It occurs to you that transformation is as much about persistence as it is about change. The ancient Greeks believed that nymphs and minor gods could inhabit natural features, trees, rivers, springs, becoming one with the earth itself. This belief created a world where nature and the divine were inseparable, a seamless dance of existence. Historians still debate how literal these transformations were considered, whether myths were taken as true stories or poetic metaphors for human connection to nature. Either way, the idea resonates deeply as you sit beside Linus, feeling the quiet strength he embodies. Root, ever faithful, bounds ahead chasing a butterfly, its fragile wings flashing iridescent colors in the sunlight. You smile at the dog's boundless energy, a lively contrast to the steady stillness of the grove. Theophanes returns, his notebook brimming with observations. He notes the remarkable biodiversity thriving around Linus, the tiny mosses, the symbiotic fungi, the birds nesting within his branches. He speaks softly about the ancient practice of tree planting rituals, ceremonies meant to honor the life cycle and ensure prosperity. As you listen, you think about how the minor god's slow, patient transformation mirrors the rhythms of nature itself, quiet, unhurried, profound. You lean back against a tree trunk, the warmth of the morning sun on your face, and feel the grove's heartbeat align with your own. The day begins anew, and you are exactly where you are meant to be, here, in the gentle embrace of this living myth. The sun climbs higher, turning the grove into a cathedral of light and shadow. The way it filters through the leaves creates an ever-changing mosaic on the forest floor, a moving artwork in green and gold. You follow a butterfly as it flits lazily, landing on a cluster of white blossoms that sway gently in the warm breeze. Linus stands quietly, his transformation well underway. The texture of his bark has deepened, now etched with fine lines that resemble ancient runes or whispered secrets. His branches reach out wide, casting a cool shade that invites rest and reflection. You feel a sense of reverence, as if standing near a guardian of some forgotten wisdom. The ancient Greeks held trees sacred not just for their life-giving shade but because many were believed to harbor spirits, dryads and hamadryads, whose lives were bound to their tree's health. It's fascinating to remember that harming such a tree was considered sacrilegious, sometimes punishable by law. Historians still argue about how seriously these beliefs were enforced, but the reverence is clear. You watch as Root investigates a fallen acorn, sniffing it curiously before nudging it aside, clearly more interested in the scent than the snack. His presence feels grounding, a reminder of the simple joys amidst transformation. Theophanes approaches, carrying a small wooden box. Opening it, he reveals tiny, hand-carved figurines, representations of minor gods, nymphs, and forest spirits. He explains how these objects were often buried at sacred sites to protect and honor the spirits dwelling there. There's a quirky theory floating among some fringe scholars that these figurines were used as communication devices, a way for mortals to send messages to the divine realm. While this is met with skepticism, it adds a playful layer to the mysteries surrounding ancient religious practices. As afternoon drifts toward evening, you feel the grove's pulse sync with your own heartbeat. The slow, steady rhythm of life unfolding, the gentle shift of time marked not by clocks but by the rise and fall of sunlight and shadow. Linus rustles softly in the breeze, a living monument to patience, change, and the quiet power of becoming. You settle deeper into the mossy earth, feeling your thoughts drift like leaves on a slow-moving stream. Evening arrives with a gentle hush, softening the edges of the day. The grove glows under a cooling sky streaked with lavender and rose, a perfect pause before night's quiet embrace. You breathe in the rich scent of damp earth mixed with the faint sweetness of evening primrose, feeling the calm seep slowly into your bones. Linus stands tall and steady, a figure of enduring grace. His bark has darkened further, rich and textured, the veins in his leaves pulsing faintly with a subtle, almost imperceptible light. He has become less a god trapped in wood and more the very essence of the grove itself, a living monument to patience and quiet transformation. You recall the ancient practice of arbor sanctuaries, sacred spaces set aside not only for worship but as refuges for wildlife and people alike. These groves were places of healing, where one could find peace and restoration. Historians still debate how these spaces balanced religious function with early ecological stewardship. Nearby, the soft rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush reminds you that life continues in all its forms here, unseen yet deeply felt. Root lies curled beside you, his breath slow and even, a steady presence in this sanctuary. Theophanes joins you once more, this time with a small lantern flickering softly in his hand. He speaks quietly about how light and shadow play symbolic roles in ancient myths, light representing knowledge, shadow the unknown, and how the grove itself embodies this balance. You watch as fireflies begin their nightly dance, tiny sparks of light weaving through the darkness like living stars. It's easy to see how these small wonders inspired myths and stories passed down through generations. Linus's leaves whisper in the breeze, and you feel a deep, unspoken connection between the past and present, the mortal and divine, the human and natural world. The grove breathes around you, a timeless lullaby, inviting you to surrender to the slow unfolding of night. You close your eyes, letting the gentle darkness carry you closer to sleep. Night deepens and the grove is transformed into a shadowy sanctuary. The moon, full and luminous, casts silver light across the gnarled branches and soft moss, turning everything into a dreamscape where reality and myth blur. The air is cool and carries the faint scent of pine needles mixed with the subtle, musky aroma of the forest floor. Linus stands still, but you can sense the life pulsing just beneath his bark. His leaves shimmer faintly in the moonlight, as if holding secrets whispered only to the stars. He is no longer simply a god-turned tree, he is a symbol of timeless endurance, a quiet guardian of this sacred space. You remember that ancient Greeks often used moonlight in their rituals, believing it was a time when the veil between worlds thinned. Sacred groves were sometimes sites for nocturnal ceremonies, and minor gods like Linus might be honored under the silvery glow. Historians still debate the extent to which these nighttime rituals influenced mainstream Greek religion. Nearby, Root stretches and yawns, his silhouette outlined against the soft glow of phosphorescent fungi clinging to fallen logs. The fungi pulse faintly, casting eerie blue light that feels like nature's own nightlight. Theophanes sits beside you, unrolling a new section of his scroll. He discusses a fringe theory about the whispering trees, the idea that trees could communicate through vibrations imperceptible to humans, sharing knowledge and warnings. While mainstream scholars are skeptical, the concept fits well with the quiet, mysterious vibe of the grove. You let your thoughts drift, imagining the grove as a vast network of sentient beings, rooted, yet alive with a hidden dialogue beneath the surface. Linus's leaves rustle gently, a soothing sound like the softest breath. You lean back against the sturdy trunk of an ancient oak nearby, feeling the steady heartbeat of the forest beneath you. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you surrender to the gentle pull of sleep, cradled by the myth and mystery of this living grove. The night deepens and the grove feels alive with whispered secrets. The stars twinkle faintly through the canopy, their distant light mingling with the gentle glow of fireflies hovering like tiny lanterns. The air is cool and fragrant, carrying the soft rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of crickets, a natural lullaby inviting rest. Linus stands unmoving, a sentinel cloaked in bark and leaf. His form blends seamlessly into the surrounding trees, yet you can sense an ancient wisdom emanating from him, a stillness that speaks louder than any words. The transformation is complete, he is no longer just a minor god or a tree but a living bridge between worlds. The ancient Greeks often saw trees as living beings with souls, capable of feeling joy and sorrow. Sacred groves were places where the divine and earthly intersected, a concept that fascinates historians who still debate the literal versus symbolic meaning of these beliefs. You watch as a small owl flutters silently through the branches, its eyes gleaming with curiosity before it disappears into the darkness. Root lies curled at your feet, his breathing slow and rhythmic, matching the grove's steady pulse. Theophanes, ever the scholar, shares an intriguing fringe theory. Some ancient myths suggest that minor gods like Linus could influence the growth of plants and even communicate with animals through subtle energies. While mainstream academia remains skeptical, the idea adds a layer of magic to the grove's already mysterious atmosphere. You lean back against Linus's sturdy trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath your fingertips. The night sounds blend with the soft rustling of leaves, wrapping you in a cocoon of tranquility. Your eyelids grow heavy, and the grove's timeless embrace lulls you deeper into sleep, a gentle journey through myth and nature intertwined. You awake to the soft, dappled light filtering through the leaves, the morning chorus of birdsong a gentle wake-up call. The air is fresh and cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. You stretch slowly, feeling the comforting weight of the grove around you, a green sanctuary that seems to breathe in time with your own heartbeat. Linus, now fully rooted and transformed, stands proudly amidst the other trees. His bark glows softly in the morning sun, his leaves rustling a quiet greeting. There's a calmness about him that is both eternal and deeply present, a living reminder of the passage of time and the persistence of nature. You recall that many ancient Greek festivals were held in sacred groves, celebrating seasonal cycles and the gods who embodied them. These gatherings were as much about community and renewal as they were about worship. Historians still debate whether such rituals were primarily religious or social events, but their importance to ancient life is clear. As you wander, you spot a rare plant growing near Linus's roots, one believed to have medicinal properties, used by local healers for centuries. It's a small but significant reminder of the intertwined relationship between myth, nature, and human survival. Theophanes joins you, his excitement barely contained as he shares a quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts suggest that certain minor gods could grant blessings through touch, even in their tree forms, helping plants grow or healing wounds. It's an idea met with skepticism by mainstream scholars but beloved by storytellers. You smile at Root, who sniffs the air and trots off to explore, his boundless energy a contrast to the grove's steady calm. As the day warms, you settle beneath Linus's shade, feeling the ancient energy pulse through the earth beneath you. The grove is alive, not just with plants and animals, but with stories and spirits, a living myth that you are part of. Your eyes grow heavy again, lulled by the grove's slow rhythm and the soft rustle of leaves overhead. The afternoon sun filters warmly through the canopy, dappling the forest floor with shifting patches of light and shadow. The air smells faintly of resin and wild herbs, carrying the soothing scent of growth and quiet life. You feel the gentle pull of drowsiness, wrapped in the serene embrace of the grove. Linus's branches sway slightly in a gentle breeze, the leaves shimmering with a soft, verdant glow. His bark now seems etched with intricate patterns, almost like runes or ancient markings, hinting at the deep magic woven into his very form. He is no longer simply a transformed god but a living repository of the grove's stories and memories. You recall that in ancient Greece, trees like the olive, oak, and laurel were symbols of peace, victory, and wisdom. Sacred trees often stood at the heart of temples, embodying the divine presence. Historians still debate whether the veneration of trees influenced the creation of early Greek alphabetic symbols, given the symbolic importance of nature in their culture. Root pads beside you, his fur warm and soft, as you watch a family of squirrels darting playfully through the branches. Their carefree movements feel like a joyful counterpoint to the grove's solemn grandeur. Theophanes shares a fascinating fringe theory about arboreal memory, the idea that trees can somehow store and pass down information across generations, a botanical form of storytelling. While the science is still emerging and scholars remain cautious, the concept adds a mysterious depth to the ancient myths you've been exploring. You lean back against Linus's trunk, the rough texture grounding you in the present moment even as your mind drifts through layers of myth and history. The grove hums softly around you, alive with the pulse of time and nature entwined. Your eyes flutter closed, welcoming the slow descent into rest and dreams. Twilight settles over the grove, painting the sky in soft shades of lavender and deepening blue. The air cools, carrying the scent of wild thyme and damp moss. You feel the calm folding around you like a well-worn blanket, the day's warmth fading gently into night's embrace. Linus's silhouette stands tall and steady against the dimming light. His branches reach upward, intertwining with the surrounding trees, as if weaving himself into the very fabric of the forest. The faint rustle of his leaves sounds almost like a whispered song, a secret lullaby passed down through the ages. It's fascinating to remember that in ancient Greek culture, trees were often seen as oracles, channels through which gods spoke their will. The sacred oak at Dodona, for example, was said to deliver messages through the rustling of its leaves. Historians still debate whether such oracles were truly believed to be divine or were early forms of natural philosophy. You notice a hedgehog scurrying through the underbrush, its spiny form a humble reminder of the wildness preserved within these sacred spaces. Root watches curiously but remains still, sensing the quiet magic in the air. Theophanes presents a quirky tidbit about ancient rites involving tree spirits. Sometimes people would sleep beneath sacred trees hoping to receive dreams or visions, a practice called incubation. Though this sounds a bit like a spa day for the soul, historians are divided on how widespread or effective these rituals truly were. You lean against Linus once more, feeling the warmth of his bark under your hand, a steady pulse beneath the rough surface. The grove breathes around you, a timeless rhythm of growth, silence, and slow transformation. You close your eyes, surrendering to the gentle pull of night and the soft, rustling whispers that seem to tell stories just for you. The stars emerge one by one as night deepens, each twinkling like a tiny beacon in the vast velvet sky. The grove is bathed in a silvery glow, the leaves and branches transforming into shimmering silhouettes that sway with the night breeze. The air feels cooler now, carrying the soft, earthy scent of pine needles and rich soil. Linas stands quietly, a silent sentinel under the celestial canopy. His bark seems to absorb the starlight, glowing faintly as if infused with the cosmos itself. His leaves flutter gently, a murmuring conversation with the night wind. You sense that in this moment, he embodies the connection between earth and sky, mortal and divine. It's worth noting that the ancient Greeks linked many gods and myths to celestial bodies and constellations. Trees and stars often shared symbolic relationships, with certain constellations believed to watch over sacred groves. Historians still debate how deeply these cosmic connections influenced religious practice and mythology. Nearby, Root lies curled up in the soft moss, his breathing steady and peaceful, a furry anchor in the quiet wildness. Theophanes shares a fascinating fringe theory about cosmic dendrology, the idea that trees might reflect the stars' patterns in their branching structures, forming a kind of natural astrology. While this is far from accepted mainstream thought, it's a beautiful notion, and you find yourself imagining constellations mirrored in leaf and limb. You lean your head back against the rough bark of Linas, feeling a serene harmony between the grove, the stars, and your own slow, steady breath. The night wraps around you like a soft cloak, the gentle rustling of leaves like a lullaby coaxing you toward rest. You close your eyes, sinking into the calm, a part of this endless dance between earth and sky. A soft mist begins to rise, curling through the grove like a silken ribbon. The air cools further, tinged with the crisp scent of early morning dew mingled with pine and damp earth. You feel wrapped in a quiet hush, as if the world itself is holding its breath in anticipation. Linas, still rooted and steadfast, glows faintly in the dim light, his leaves shimmering with tiny droplets of moisture. His bark is dark and textured, a living tapestry of growth and change. You imagine the countless seasons he has witnessed, standing as a silent witness to the cycles of life. It's fascinating to remember that the Greeks saw trees as symbols of immortality and renewal. The oak, especially, was sacred to Zeus and represented strength and endurance. Historians still debate how these associations influenced political and cultural symbols in ancient Greek society. Nearby, Root pads quietly through the mist, his paws soft on the mossy floor, occasionally sniffing the air with gentle curiosity. His presence is a comforting constant in this ever-shifting natural world. Theophanes pulls out a small vial filled with fragrant herbs, explaining that ancient Greeks often used aromatic plants in rituals to honor nature spirits. A quirky tidbit, some believed certain herbs could help humans communicate with tree spirits during trance-like states. While historians remain skeptical about these claims, such stories add a mysterious charm to the grove's magic. You lean against Linas once again, the cool bark grounding you as the mist swirls gently around your feet. The grove feels alive in every sense, rooted in history, myth, and the slow, steady pulse of nature itself. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you feel yourself drifting, cradled by the quiet power of the grove and its eternal transformation. The morning light filters softly through the mist, casting an ethereal glow across the grove. Dew sparkles like tiny jewels on the leaves, and the scent of wet earth and blooming jasmine fills the air. You inhale deeply, feeling the crisp freshness awaken your senses as the world stirs gently to life. Linas stands majestic amid the delicate haze, his bark glistening with moisture, each ridge and groove telling silent stories of endurance and transformation. His branches sway slowly in the breeze, leaves trembling like soft whispers. You realize that he's become more than a tree, he's a living monument to change, a testament to resilience through time. The ancient Greeks often revered trees not only for their physical presence but for their symbolic meaning. For example, the laurel was sacred to Apollo and represented victory and poetic inspiration. Historians still debate whether these symbolic roles had real influence on daily life or were more ritualistic and symbolic. Root stretches lazily nearby, paws tucked beneath him as he watches a bee pollinate a cluster of wildflowers. His quiet companionship feels like a steady heartbeat beneath the grove's vast canopy. Theophanes shares a curious, somewhat fringe theory, that the veins and leaves could be ancient symbols, early attempts at writing or communication with the gods, hidden in plain sight. While mainstream scholars doubt this interpretation, it's a charming idea that adds a layer of wonder to the natural patterns around you. You rest your hand against Linus's bark again, feeling the subtle vibrations of life coursing beneath the surface. The grove is alive with quiet stories, ancient rhythms, and the slow dance of light and shadow. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the grove's timeless melody and the soft whisper of leaves. The day gently wanes, and the grove is bathed in the soft, golden hues of late afternoon. Shafts of sunlight filter through the dense canopy, creating moving patterns of light and shadow that dance slowly across the mossy ground. The air is warm but carries a faint hint of evening's coolness, mingled with the earthy scent of pine and decaying leaves. Linus stands serene, his bark glowing warmly in the fading light. His leaves flutter softly in the breeze, a gentle rustling sound that feels like nature's own whisper. You can almost imagine the ancient prayers and songs that may once have been offered to him here, a quiet echo of human voices mingling with the wind. It's intriguing that many sacred trees in ancient Greece were not just venerated but also believed to house spirits or nymphs, known as dryads. These minor deities were thought to embody the life force of the tree itself. Historians still debate whether dryads were symbolic figures or believed to be actual living entities by ancient worshippers. Root pads close to you, sniffing at a cluster of wild herbs that grow thick around Linus's base. His curiosity is gentle, unhurried, fitting perfectly with the grove's timeless rhythm. Theophanes offers a quirky tidbit. Some legends suggest that if you listen closely to the rustling leaves, you might hear the whispers of these tree spirits communicating warnings or blessings. While modern scholars are divided on such beliefs, the idea adds a magical aura to the grove. You lean back against Linus's trunk, the rough bark grounding you as your thoughts drift lazily with the evening breeze. The grove hums softly, a living symphony of growth, memory, and quiet enchantment. Your eyelids droop as the day melts into night, carried gently by the grove's ancient lullaby. Night falls softly over the grove, the sky now a deep navy canvas speckled with countless stars. A cool breeze stirs the leaves, their soft rustling like a gentle chorus singing you toward rest. The scent of jasmine and pine lingers sweetly in the air, mingling with the faint earthiness of moss and soil. Linus stands silently, his silhouette outlined by the pale moonlight. His branches sway gently, casting intricate shadows that play upon the forest floor like living lace. The ancient magic of this place feels alive, a quiet pulse woven into the very air you breathe. Ancient Greeks often associated trees with the divine presence, believing that the gods could dwell within them. Sacred groves were places of sanctuary and prayer, sometimes guarded by mysterious figures. Historians still debate the nature of these guardians. Were they actual priests, or perhaps mythic beings embodying the grove's spirit? You hear the soft padding of Root's paws nearby as he settles down beside you, his warmth a comforting presence in the cool night. His eyes gleam softly in the moonlight, alert yet peaceful. Theophanes shares an interesting fringe tale about the sleeping trees, a belief that some trees could enter a trance-like state to communicate with the gods during the night. Though largely dismissed by mainstream scholars, it's a poetic notion that adds a dreamlike quality to the grove's atmosphere. You lean your head back against Linus's sturdy trunk, feeling the rough texture grounding you as your breathing slows and deepens. The night wraps you gently, the whisper of leaves like a soothing lullaby that carries you closer to sleep. Your eyelids flutter shut, drifting into dreams cradled by the eternal forest. Dawn returns slowly, brushing the treetops with pale gold. The sky shifts from indigo to soft peach, casting warm light across the grove. You stir beneath the canopy, dew still clinging to the blades of grass around you, cool against your skin. The air carries the fresh, renewing scent of the first light, a blend of petrichor, pine, and something faintly floral. Linus's leaves glisten in the morning light, each one trembling slightly as if stretching after a long, restful night. His trunk feels warmer now, sun-kissed and steadfast, as though quietly greeting the new day. The grove has a hush to it, but not of silence, more like reverence. It's easy to understand why ancient people chose places like this for temples and altars. In fact, many Greek temple sites began as sacred groves before any stone was ever laid. Historians still argue whether the trees were replaced by columns intentionally, each pillar echoing a trunk, or whether the two coexisted for centuries. Root yawns widely and begins his morning routine of sniffs, tail wags, and exaggerated stretches. His fur is damp with dew, and he shakes off with a delighted snort, scattering droplets like tiny diamonds into the sunbeams. Theophanes, brushing moss from his tunic, offers you a smile and a sleepy observation. I once read that some believe trees whispered the future at sunrise. You just had to be patient enough to listen. Whether that's truth or charming fiction, you listen anyway, eyes closed, ears tuned to the soft rustling of leaves overhead. You lean back, soaking in the light and sound, sensing that Linas, though rooted, is very much awake, content, aware, and somehow still listening too. The day opens slowly, and so do your dreams, curling softly into the morning haze. The grove glows beneath the gentle ascent of the sun, each leaf catching the light like a mirror of calm. Birds begin their soft morning songs, trills and chirps that weave through the trees like threads of melody. The world feels hushed but hopeful, as if every branch is holding its breath just long enough to let the light settle in. Linas, tall and unmoving, now seems brighter, almost radiant. His branches form a natural archway that frames the rising sun, and for a moment, it's hard not to feel as if you're standing within a living temple. The warmth of the bark against your hand feels familiar now, like the reassuring touch of an old friend. Many ancient Greeks believed that sacred trees had guardian nymphs, dryads, who lived and died with the tree. These forest spirits were said to appear only in moments of deep emotion or transformation. Historians still debate how literal these beliefs were, or whether they served more as symbolic reminders to respect nature's power. Root trots toward a cluster of mushrooms growing in a shaded nook near Linas's roots, nose twitching with curiosity. He snorts once, disinterested, and plops down in the dappled sunlight, eyes half-lidded with contentment. Theophanes chuckles softly and shares a quirky old belief. Some thought mushrooms that grew beneath sacred trees were enchanted, portals to hidden realms or the remains of dreams the tree had discarded during the night. While science is clear on their biological purpose, the poetry of the myth lingers. You sit quietly beside Linas, letting the warmth seep into your skin, the rustle of leaves and occasional bird call easing you into a gentle stillness. The grove is awake, yet remains cradled in a kind of eternal slowness. Sleep pulls gently at the edge of your mind, calm and inevitable. The day matures lazily, like a cat stretching in a sunbeam. Light sifts through the canopy in golden strands, and the forest seems to hum with quiet satisfaction. Every blade of grass, every trembling leaf, feels tuned to the same slow, sacred rhythm, a rhythm you've slipped into so naturally, you barely remember the pace of the outside world. Linas stands unwavering, his form casting a cool shadow over you. His trunk is warm now, absorbing and radiating the sun's gentle heat like a stone wall in summer. You notice the tiniest buds near the tips of his branches, fresh signs of growth, quiet proof that even stillness contains movement. In ancient Athens, certain trees were so revered they were granted legal protection. Cutting them down, even accidentally, could lead to exile or death. Historians still argue whether these laws were driven by religious fear or simply early conservation. Either way, it shows how deeply trees like Linas were woven into the civic and spiritual life of the Greeks. Root sighs heavily in the shade, his tail flicking once with lazy contentment. His presence is grounding, like an anchor to this slowly drifting moment. You reach out and gently scratch behind his ear, rewarded with a soft, happy grunt. Theophanes lounges nearby, sketching something in the dirt with a stick, a spiral surrounded by tiny leaves. They say, he murmurs, if you trace a spiral sunward around a sacred tree, your dreams will grow roots. It's one of those fringe folk beliefs that sounds made up, but still, you find yourself tracing a spiral anyway, just in case. The breeze stirs, warm and steady, and the leaves answer in kind, whispering overhead. You close your eyes, heart quiet, breath slow. The grove holds you gently, just as Linus always has, unchanged and completely accepting. The sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose. Long shadows stretch across the grove, softening the world into watercolor hues. The trees sigh with the wind, and the earth smells sweeter now, warmed by the day and cooled by the coming night. It's that in-between time, when the light still lingers, but everything else leans toward rest. Linus remains silent and strong, bathed in the warm blush of twilight. His branches arch high above, catching the last rays of the sun, holding them like gold coins in his leaves. You notice a single leaf detach, spinning gently to the ground. It lands beside you with a sound so soft, it's more felt than heard. The Greeks were obsessed with omens, and falling leaves, especially from sacred trees, were sometimes seen as messages from the gods. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were ritualized or deeply personal, like a kind of leafy fortune-telling only the initiated could understand. Root lifts his head, ears twitching at the rustle, but he doesn't move, just watches the drifting leaf with slow, curious eyes, then lets out a long, contented breath and settles back into his nap. Theophane smiles faintly. You know, he says, voice barely above the wind, there's a theory, well outside the mainstream, that sacred groves were early dream incubators. People would sleep beside trees like Linus hoping for visions. The trees, they thought, were dream conductors. You nod, feeling no need to question the logic. Not here. Not now. You rest your back against Linus, who's been here for everything. Every whisper of myth, every snore from Root, every lecture from Theophanes. He's the quiet constant, unchanged by time, patient as stone. And now, with the sun kissing the horizon and the stars peeking in again, it's time to let go. Let's ease you there. So here you are, beneath Linus's quiet branches, the grove slowly folding into night like a tired page turning itself. The warmth fades gently into coolness, the kind that wraps around your skin like a blanket just pulled from the drawer. The wind has softened to a breeze, and even the birds seem to sing in whispers now. You lie still, your body heavy in the best way, muscles slack, breath deep, heart content. The hush of the grove moves through you. Every sound is round and muted, the distant owl, the creak of bark, the sleepy rustle of Root shifting in his dreams. The stars gather again, blinking open one by one, just as they did when this story began. You remember their soft gleam filtering through the branches, how the leaves shimmered like silver coins, how time slowed, then stopped, then disappeared. This is your resting place now. The story doesn't end, not really. It settles. Roots deeper. Fades into sleep. You're part of this grove, of Linus, of the hush, of the dreams that trees hold gently in their rings. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the dark rise slow and kind. Let your breath match the sway of the leaves, your pulse the echo of ancient footsteps on moss. You're safe here. Quiet here. Home here. Sleep now. Dream slow. End of script. Sweet dreams.